Welcome. Take a deep breath, let your eyes rest, and allow your thoughts to drift gently away from the noise of today, toward the quiet creak of wood on water, the distant roll of waves, and the soft rustle of canvas above. Tonight, we step aboard a vessel not known for its comfort, but for its endurance, for its power to connect entire worlds, and for the weary souls who lived, labored, and often perished on its decks. This is the story of the Spanish galleons, the colossal wooden ships that once braved oceans to carry treasure, people, and ambition between Spain and its distant colonies. You may have heard tales of gold, spices, and grand voyages. But tonight, we won't focus on glory. We'll begin, instead, below deck where the air was thick, the bread was hard, and hope was as scarce as fresh water. Over the next 2 hours, you'll quietly explore the daily misery of being a common sailor on the famed Manila galleon, the tragic odyssey of Magellan and his fateful voyage, the sunken secrets of galleons swallowed by the sea, and in contrast, the gentle rituals of luxury among noble passengers aboard these same ships. This journey is one of slow rhythm and subtle discovery. There is no need to stay alert. Just listen as history unfolds like a sail catching wind, and let the hum of the past lull you into calm. So now, let us begin with the salt, sweat, and shadows below the deck. Imagine this. You awaken before the sun has risen, in a place where day and night blur together, not by choice, but because someone above has begun walking the deck, the sound of their boots vibrating through the thick wooden boards. Your eyes open slowly to darkness. The stale air smells of bodies sweat-soaked, salt-stung, and long unwashed. There is no fresh breeze here, deep in the belly of the ship. Only the low groan of timber and the occasional splash of the sea beyond the hull. You are aboard a Manila galleon, a ship built for endurance, not comfort. These galleons were the lifeblood of Spain's colonial empire, sailing between Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in New Spain, modern-day Mexico. A round trip could take up to 8 or 9 months, much of it spent drifting across an unbroken expanse of ocean, with no land in sight and no certainty of return. You rise from your hammock, or perhaps from a rough mat of canvas on the floor. Hammocks were prized, but not guaranteed. Many sailors slept wherever there was space. Above and below, bodies swayed with the ship. Privacy didn't exist. Neither did silence. Someone always coughed. Someone always prayed softly in the dark. A bucket in the corner serves its unfortunate purpose. You try not to breathe too deeply. The workday begins without ceremony. There is no breakfast bell, no warm porridge waiting. Instead, you are handed a chunk of hardtack, a thick, dry biscuit made weeks or even months ago. It is brittle, bland, and full of surprises. Insects, mostly. You don't pick them out anymore. You've grown used to the crunch. For water, a ration is drawn from a barrel. Wooden casks don't preserve freshness. What was once clear is now tinged yellow or green. Sometimes the barrel is slimy inside. The water smells faintly of mold. You drink it anyway. You have no choice. On rare days, if the heavens open, you catch rainwater in canvas and drink straight from the sky. But those days are few. You wear the same clothes today as you wore yesterday, and the day before. Wool, linen, leather, none of it clean, and all of it soaked with salt. If it rained recently, you're still damp. If not, the sweat has dried into stiff, sour patches. There is no soap, no place to wash. The ship carries men and cargo, but little concern for comfort. As you move above deck, the heat greets you. If you are still near the tropics, the sun bears down without mercy. The deck boards radiate heat through the soles of your worn shoes. The air tastes like brine. The sails, great wings of canvas, flap gently or strain under the pull of the wind. If the sea is calm, the world feels still flat, endless, and eerily quiet. If the sea is rough, every movement becomes a challenge. Your tasks depend on your station, but few are easy. You may scrub the deck with coarse sand, hauling buckets of seawater up from over the side. You may help adjust the sails, your hands raw from rope work. You might patch canvas, scrape barnacles, or carry cargo. You may stand watch, staring into the blue for hours, or clean the officers' quarters, careful not to disturb their notes or their rum. Most of all, you wait for wind, for land, for orders, for relief. There are over 100 men on this ship, sometimes far more, depending on the cargo and the voyage. The galleons were floating warehouses, built to carry vast wealth from Asia to the Americas. Silks from China, porcelain, spices, lacquerware, even ivory. And yet, for the men who carried them, life was threadbare. You learn early to step carefully. The decks are slick. A misplaced foot on the narrow catwalk above the hold could send you tumbling down into crates or barrels. There are no medics on board. If you're lucky, a friar or senior crewman may stitch you up. If not, you may simply recover or not. Below deck, the smells blend into a thick, permanent fog. Fish, tobacco, vomit, unwashed flesh, old rope, urine, mold, and pitch. You stop noticing after a while. Your nose grows tired. You begin to lose track of time. Without clocks or calendars, the rhythms of the sun and the changing duties of the watch become your guide. One day bleeds into the next. Sunday prayers mark the weeks, but even they begin to feel like echoes. Some men gamble with carved bone dice. Others mend clothes, carve bits of wood, or hum the same few tunes over and over. If someone has a voice for it, he might sing sea ballads old, sad things, half-remembered. Some songs come from Spain, others from Mexico or the islands. The ship is a chorus of languages, but suffering is its own shared dialect. You may speak with a mestizo carpenter from Cebu, a Basque sailor from Bilbao, or a forced convict from Seville, serving his time with rope and salt. Men come from everywhere, but aboard the galleon they are equal in discomfort. As the days pass, something begins to grow aboard the ship. Not a visible thing, not a noise, but a heaviness, a slowness in movement, a dullness in the eyes of your shipmates. It begins with weariness. A man complains of aching limbs, another of bleeding gums. A third cannot keep food down. You've seen this before. Everyone has. Scurvy. Without fresh food, the body begins to consume itself. Gums swell, teeth loosen, old wounds reopen. Skin bruises at the slightest touch, muscles waste. There is no cure on board, only a bitter waiting. If the ship is lucky, a few barrels of pickled cabbage or tamarind might have been brought along, but these spoil quickly. Often, nothing remains. Scurvy was the quiet killer of the sea. It could claim half a crew before landfall, sometimes more. Men simply faded away. Some curled up in corners, no longer able to rise. Some disappeared overboard, either taken by the waves or, in darker hours, by their own hands. There are other illnesses too, fevers that spread in the damp, infections from splinters or scraped knuckles. The bloody flux. What we now know as dysentery sweeps through when the water turns truly foul. A man with a wound may die in a week. A man with a cough may pass it to 10 more. There are no doctors on board, only the priest and the boatswain. One prays, the other binds cloth. When a man dies, there is no ceremony beyond necessity. A piece of canvas stitched closed, a small prayer in Latin, then gently or sometimes quickly slid into the sea. The splash is brief. The silence after is long. The ocean, vast and unmoved, does not pause for grief. Yet even that sea, so calm in the mornings, can turn monstrous by afternoon. Storms are a terror no sailor grows used to. When the sky turns black, the crew moves quickly. Sails are reefed, cargo tied down, You tighten ropes with numb fingers, shouting into the rising wind. The galleon groans under the strain. It is not built for speed, but for burden. And in heavy storms, it becomes a lumbering beast at the mercy of the waves. Lightning cracks in the distance, then overhead. Rain lashes your skin. Salt mixes with sweat and fear. The wheel spins violently, held steady only by the strongest among you. Below deck, those not on duty hold onto beams or hammocks, listening to the ship shudder and creak. Every crash of thunder feels personal. Sometimes during such storms, a mast breaks, or a sail tears free. Sometimes men are lost overboard, quickly and forever. There is no turning back to search. And when the storm finally passes, what remains is a ship bruised and quiet, clothes and faces soaked, voices hushed. You go back to work. There is always work. The monotony of daily life returns. But beneath it runs the unspoken knowledge that each day is borrowed. Each day is stolen from the sea. You watch the sky constantly, not for storms, but for navigation. The galleon has no compass that every sailor may use. Instead, it trusts in tradition, in the stars, in the steady hand of the pilot, the ship's navigator. He reads the sun at noon, the stars at night, and the movement of the waves. He measures time with sandglasses and distance with knots in a line. And yet, errors happen. The Pacific is vast, and charts are crude. Land can be missed by hundreds of miles. An island might lie just beyond the horizon, unseen. And so, you drift. Sometimes for weeks, waiting, hoping. The most haunting sound is the silence of no birds, no driftwood, no clouds. Just blue in every direction. You begin to wonder, are you moving at all? These long stretches break the mind. Some men go quiet, speaking only in their sleep. Others talk to themselves aloud. Some sing, some whisper to the sea, and still there is the discipline. The galleon runs on strict order. Spanish naval tradition allowed for harsh punishments. For theft, the lash. For insubordination, the stocks. For violence, worse imprisonment in the ship's brig or chained to the mast. Sometimes, sailors were suspended by their arms, tied and left to hang for hours. The officers enforced order because the ship depended on it. A single fire, a single mutiny, could doom them all. And so, rules were iron. Obedience was survival. Even small joys were rationed. Rations of rum or wine, if present, were rare. Letters from home were ancient by the time they arrived, months-old news from distant places. The paper smelled of another world. You may find moments of comfort in small things. The familiar rasp of a fellow sailor's voice. A worn pendant tied to your neck. A song your mother once sang, now heard in your head, over and over. Night comes again. The sky clears. The sea calms. And above you, stars. Thousands of them, scattered across the sky, unmoving and eternal. You lie back on the deck, or return to your swaying hammock below. The ship creaks gently. You are, for now, alive. As the weeks stretch into months, your body adapts, but your mind begins to wander. The sea offers few diversions. There is no land to explore, no letters to write, no news to hear. You begin to think more often of home, but even home begins to lose its shape. Your memories grow soft like old fabric. A mother's voice becomes unfamiliar. A lover's face becomes uncertain. You forget the smell of soil, the sound of church bells, the warmth of still air. What remains is the ship, always the ship. Wooden walls, salt air, the taste of metal on your tongue. The groaning moan of planks expanding in the heat. The same faces. The same sounds. You are surrounded by men, yet often feel utterly alone. Many of your shipmates are not from where you are. Some are Tagalog or Ilocano, forcibly conscripted in Manila. Others are Zapotic or Tlaxcalan. Many are enslaved or indentured. Some are petty criminals, offered freedom in exchange for service. Others are volunteers, though few truly knew what they were volunteering for. You don't share a common language with all of them, but gestures are enough. A shared bucket, a passed cup, a tired smile. That is all it takes to form bonds in a place like this. Sometimes you trade words, learn a phrase in another tongue, a joke, a prayer. You don't remember how it began, but there is a small group of men who meet in the corner of the lower hold each evening. They sit in a circle, silent at first, then someone hums. Another adds a verse. It's not for performance, it's for remembering. Music, like the stars, doesn't belong to any one place. It becomes a quiet rebellion, a way to remind yourselves that you are human, not cargo. You may never see these men again after landfall. Many will not survive the return voyage. But for now, they are your brothers, your world. Occasionally, there is a moment of unexpected beauty. A dolphin swims alongside the hull, its fins slicing through the water like poetry. A school of flying fish arcs into the air, catching the sun. A sudden squall washes the deck clean, and for a moment, you can breathe again. Then it passes, and the routine resumes. The ship is a closed world. There are no outsiders, no rescue. You learn to live with hunger. You learn to live with sweat. You learn to live with doubt. You measure time by how many hard-tacked biscuits are left in the barrel, by the growing beard of the officer. Either way, the sun angles through the rigging. On some voyages, you never reach land at all. Ships disappear, taken by typhoon or reef or calm. They are whispered about in taverns. The San Jose never returned. The Espiritu Santo vanished after Guam. The ocean gives, and the ocean forgets. And still, the galleon sails on, across the vastness, between worlds, carrying silk and cinnamon, yes, but also quiet suffering, quiet endurance, quiet strength. You are part of something vast and slow-moving. You are invisible in history's grand pages, but essential all the same. No painting hangs in a museum for you. No ballads are sung. But you hauled the sails. You watched the stars. You endured. And as the sky darkens again, and your hammock sways gently with the sea, you close your eyes. The ship creaks beneath you. The waves lap against the hull. And the slow, forgotten rhythm of life on a galleon carries you into sleep. At sea, time becomes slippery. The day is ruled by tasks, and the night by silence, suspicion, and the slow tick of survival. You begin to notice how often the crew turns to rituals. Even the most hardened men grow quiet before storms, or whisper into their palms before climbing the rigging. You hear it more often, now little sayings, old phrases. A bird circling overhead. A spirit, they say someone watching. An empty sky before dawn? A sign that land is farther than hoped. A sudden quiet in the hold? Someone has fallen sick. No one says it aloud. On this ship, you are surrounded by superstition. A small rope tied in a loop, tucked under a shirt, a charm to keep death away. A splash of rum over the railing, an offering to the ocean. You join in, not because you believe, but because it's something to hold on to. The ship, after all, is full of the unknown. You don't truly know where you are. You don't truly know if land lies ahead. Only the pilot, standing each morning with his quadrant or astrolabe, watches the sun and makes his guess. And so the nights stretch. You are assigned to the midnight watch more often now. It's a quiet shift. The sails flap gently. The sea hisses. Your feet move slowly across the deck, feeling for the edge. The galleon is large, but in the dark, it feels much smaller. The stars above are wide, yet your world is no bigger than a few planks underfoot. You pass the helm and nod to the man steering. His eyes are bloodshot, his hands steady. He does not speak. Neither do you. You listen to the ship, to the wind, to the breath of sleep below deck, to your own heartbeat. You think about home, though the shape of it has changed. Is it the streets of Seville? A fishing village on Luzon? A courtyard in Puebla? You don't remember your sister's laugh anymore. You try to, but it fades. There is comfort in routine, even this far from shore. There is comfort in repetition, in the same steps, the same meals, the same shadows. And then, one morning, a shout breaks the quiet. It echoes down from the topmast. Tierra, tierra, land, a sound more precious than music. You rush above deck, and there faint and blurred by mist lies the edge of a continent. Acapulco, or perhaps Guam. It depends on the voyage. But the sight is the same. Trees, color, a coastline that does not move. Men cheer, but weakly. Some just close their eyes and smile. Some weep. You feel nothing at first, just relief and a strange kind of emptiness. For months, the ship was your only world. Now, land feels foreign. You will not walk normally at first. Your legs forget the firmness of soil. You may stumble. You may feel the earth tilt. But you will feel sun on your face, not filtered through rigging. The ship unloads. Silks, spices, boxes of tea, porcelain, a fortune in fine things. And yet you, the sailor, will see none of it. You are paid little, sometimes not at all. If you survive, you may drink, you may rest. You may even sign on for another voyage. Some do, most don't. You watch as new faces come aboard, young, eager, unaware. You want to warn them, but you don't. The galleon will sail again, with new winds, new rats, new storms, but always the same struggle. And so, as this day ends, and your hammock sways once more beneath a wooden sky, you remember the rhythm of waves. You remember the creak of rope. You remember that you were here, on this vast, groaning ship, drifting between worlds. Sleep now. You've earned your rest. The year is around 1495. You're young, no more than 15. A page in the house of Queen Leonor, the widow of King Joao II. You polish silver. You listen to Latin lessons. You learn to walk without sound. And you hear stories, stories of gold, of dragons, of a land far east called the Spice Islands, where the air is said to carry the scent of cloves, and the bark of trees is sweeter than cinnamon. And so begins the quiet ambition of a young noble, Ferdinand Magellan. He is not rich, not born to command, but he watches and learns. By 1505, he is a sailor, barely 25, serving under Francisco de Almeida, the first viceroy of Portuguese India. His ship creaks beneath heavy monsoon rains. He smells pepper drying in the sun in Calicut. He sees men bow before a Portuguese cannon in Malacca. He understands quietly that power flows not just from kings, but from roots. The secret to empire is not conquest. It's control of movement, the flow of goods, the flow of time, the ability to say, go here and be obeyed. Magellan returns to Lisbon with scars. He's seen betrayal Portuguese captains at war with each other. He's seen deathmen speared in jungles, others swept overboard in typhoons. And yet, when he proposes a plan his own idea for reaching the Moluccas by sailing west, not east, he is told, no, the court has no room for him. His accent is wrong. His allies are few. So quietly, in the year 1517, Magellan leaves Portugal, not in disgrace, but in silence. He walks across the border. He arrives in Seville, Spain. There, amid cobbled streets and Moorish archways, he finds new ears. He presents a theory that the fabled Spice Islands lie within Spanish reach if only the seas westward could be crossed. Spain is eager. They've been watching Portuguese ships return with nutmeg and cinnamon, and they want their share. King Charles I, a young monarch barely 17, grants an audience. His advisors listen. One draws up a capitulation, a royal contract. And so begins a strange alliance. A Portuguese noble, serving a Spanish king, to steal a route from the east. And so the agreement was made. A Portuguese man would sail for Spain. The year was 1518, and Magellan, now nearly 40, was given the title Captain General. Along with it came a royal commission, full funding for a fleet of 5 ships, and the authority to command men and chart new routes in the name of Spain. He was given a contract called the Capitulation de Valladolid, and in it were promises titles of nobility, shares of profits, and governance of any lands he might discover. These were not small gestures. They were wagers on the ocean, on knowledge, and on one quiet man's vision of the world. But not everyone approved. Magellan was Portuguese, after all, and his crew, his officers, his pilots, his carpenters and scribes would be overwhelmingly Spanish. From the very beginning, there was doubt. The fleet began construction at Puerto de las Mulas, a wharf near Seville. 5 ships were selected, none of them new. They were small by modern standards, fragile, designed for coasting, not crossing unknown oceans. They were the Trinidad, Magellan's flagship, the San Antonio, the largest, the Concepcion, strong and narrow, the Victoria, squat and sturdy, and the Santiago, small and nimble. Each would carry supplies for 2 years: wine, dried beans, hardtack, pickled fish, olive oil, vinegar, cloth, firewood, gunpowder, ropes, spare wood, candles, salt, and barrels for everything. They also carried livestock: pigs, chickens, goats, some alive, some salted. And behind it all, stacked deep in the hulls, trade goods, beads, bells, mirrors, simple fabrics, trinkets meant for peoples the Spanish did not yet understand. As the work progressed, Magellan reviewed charts with his cosmographer Andres de San Martin and debated lines of latitude over candlelight. He met with pilots like Juan de Cartagena, who would soon become both a threat and a warning. And still the whispers grew. Cartagena, a Spanish noble with court connections, resented taking orders from a Portuguese foreigner. Though technically second in command, he undermined Magellan at every turn, refusing direct orders, delaying preparations, questioning the course of the voyage. Other officers quietly agreed. They saw Magellan as an interloper, brilliant, perhaps, but secretive and too silent to be trusted. Even Antonio Pigafetta, the Italian noble who would later record the entire voyage, noted the uneasy air in Seville before departure. And yet, the ships were loaded, the men conscripted, and the tide waited for no one. At dawn on August 10th, 1519, the fleet set out. The 5 ships slipped away from the dockyards, their sails taut with summer wind, moving gently down the Guadalquivir River. From Seville, they drifted south, past olive groves and stone villages, toward Sanlúcar de Barrameda, the final port before the open sea. There, they waited for weeks, adjusting cargo, finalizing crew lists, and taking on fresh supplies. Delays crept in like a fog. Money ran low. Morale strained. But eventually, on September 20th, 1519, they raised anchor and left Spain behind. Their first stop was the Canary Islands, a familiar staging ground for transatlantic voyages. There, the crew took on more water, chickens, and a final round of instructions delivered from the Spanish crown. Among these, a sealed letter, an order to arrest Magellan should his leadership fail. Magellan never saw the letter, but he sensed its presence, as one might sense the tension in a silent room. He said nothing. He simply ordered the sails raised once more, and they headed west into the Atlantic. Life aboard the ships quickly settled into rhythm. Watches were divided. Half the crew worked while the other half rested, sleeping in turns in hammocks or directly on deck. Below, in the stifling dark of the hold, barrels creaked and rats scurried. The diet was harsh. Salted meat, dried legumes, hard biscuits so old they had to be soaked before chewing. Sometimes the men ate leather-boiled belts softened in vinegar. The water, stored in wooden casks, quickly turned cloudy, slimy, sour, but for now, at least, they had direction. They followed the trade winds, the same route Columbus had taken decades earlier. Days passed in the hush of canvas and creaking wood. Nights were lit by stars. Sailors watched the sky and murmured the names of constellations passed down from fathers and grandfathers. The moon offered comfort, though always distant. Weeks later, they sighted South America. They hugged the coast, following it southward, past the jungled mouth of the Amazon, past the shallow shoals of Recife, past Rio de Janeiro, where they stopped briefly to make repairs and trade with local peoples. There, Magellan recorded the first signs of awe of contact with the New World. Naked peoples painted in ochre and blue, smoke from fires rising between tall palms. A quiet, endless forest filled with birdsong, unfamiliar to every ear aboard the ship. Pigafetta wrote, "We saw parrots in such color and number that no man aboard had ever imagined. But they did not linger. The winds waited. The season turned. And so the ships pushed further south. By March 1520, they had reached the cold waters of Patagonia. The coast was barren, the skies overcast, the land quiet. It was here, in Puerto San Julian, that the fleet anchored and the voyage began to fray. Magellan ordered the men to remain aboard while he explored the bay with a few trusted officers. He returned with grim news. The weather was turning. They would need to overwinter. This meant weeks, possibly months, anchored in a place they did not know. Food would run low. The cold would bite. And for the officers who already resented Magellan, this was the final insult. The mutiny began in whispers. Cartagena and two other captains, Gaspar de Quesada and Luis de Mendoza, plotted in secret. They accused Magellan of deception, of leading them to their deaths. They urged the crew to disobey, to return to Spain, to leave the stranger in the cold. One night, they struck. The Victoria and Concepcion refused Magellan's commands. Mendoza declared himself in charge. Armed sailors seized control of key decks, but Magellan had planned for this. Quietly, he sent loyal men in small boats to approach the rebel ships under cover of dark. One team climbed silently aboard the Victoria, seized the helm, and stabbed Mendoza to death mid-sentence. On the San Antonio, Magellan confronted Cartagena personally. He was arrested without a fight. Quesada, the third conspirator, was executed days later by the sword of a common sailor, a punishment chosen deliberately to dishonor. Cartagena, spared for political reasons, was marooned, left alone on a rocky shore with only bread and water. The mutiny was over. But the crew would never forget. The mutiny had failed, but the air aboard the ships had changed. Trust, once shaken, is not easily restored. Magellan said little. He walked the decks in silence, inspecting ropes, counting barrels, reviewing charts with narrowed eyes. But the men could feel it. A weight pressing slowly on the voyage. The winds had turned colder. The skies hung low and gray. Every night, ice formed on the rigging. The crew woke with hands too stiff to grip oars. And then, as October of 1520 crept in, the coastline opened just slightly. At first, it was nothing. A narrow channel between towering cliffs. Water flowing fast, with strange tides. But it didn't end. Day after day, it twisted inward, deeper between sharp rocks and shadowed coves. Magellan ordered all 5 ships, what remained of them, to enter. The strait had been found. Today, we call it the Strait of Magellan. But in those weeks, It had no name, just silence, salt, and shadow. The journey through it took over a month. Winds shifted daily, sometimes hourly. Currents surged and then reversed. Mountains closed in from both sides. Snow fell, even as the sun hung in the sky. There were no stars, just fog. No birds, just wind. No voices, just creaking wood. Some sailors began to pray aloud, chanting softly in Latin. Others stared blankly, chewing the same piece of leather for days. They dropped anchor in small bays when needed, sending scouting parties ashore. One man, a pilot named Gomez, carved into his diary, "This place is not of men. The land breathes cold. The sea is without soul." And then, in early November, the channel widened. A soft light appeared ahead, a horizon open and blue. They had made it. Beyond the strait lay another ocean. But what they found was not chaos, not towering waves or roaring winds. It was stillness. A vast expanse of water, smooth as glass. The sails hung heavy. The air stood still. Pigafetta would write, "We called it Mare Pacificum for its calm." They did not yet know that this peaceful sea stretched wider than anything they had imagined, and so they drifted. Weeks passed, then months. There were no islands, no clouds, no wind. The ship slowed to a crawl. The sun burned by day. At night, the stars mocked them, distant, uncaring. They ran out of food, then out of water. They boiled sawdust, ate rat droppings, chewed their boots. Their gums swelled, their skin cracked. Men collapsed quietly beside the barrels. Pigafetta recorded, "The biscuit we ate was not bread, but powder of biscuit, full of worms. It stank strongly of rat's urine." Of 270 men who had begun the voyage, dozens now slipped quietly overboard wrapped in cloth, slid from planks, the sea claiming them without sound. And still, the Pacific continued. 3 months. 3 months of silence, drifting west. Then, on March 6, 1521, they saw land. The island of Guam. The people there came in canoes long, fast, carved from breadfruit trees. They were friendly, curious. They offered bananas, coconuts, fish. In return, they asked for iron nails, hooks, tools. Magellan allowed trade. The men, too weak to fight, wept at the taste of sweet fruit. Pigafetta wrote, "We were as ghosts, returned to the world." From Guam, they turned southward toward the Philippines, which had not yet been named as such. They arrived at Hamanan, a quiet island with freshwater streams and white sand. And there, the voyage changed again. The islands were warm, green, alive. The people were open and willing to trade. Magellan saw opportunity. He made contact with Raja Humabon, a local leader who welcomed him as an honored guest. There were feasts, roast pig, palm wine, music made from bamboo flutes. Magellan, now thin and sunburned, spoke of God. He offered baptism. He promised protection in the name of Spain. Dozens of local leaders converted. Magellan saw himself not just as navigator, but missionary. He believed this was his calling, his reward, his reason. And so, when a rival chieftain Lapu-Lapu on the nearby island of Mactan refused to bow, Magellan responded with pride. He would show his strength. He would lead a strike force, land on the beach, and subdue the village himself. He was warned. He ignored them. At dawn on April 27, 1521, Magellan sailed with 3 small boats, carrying 49 men. They landed in shallow waters, forced to wade knee-deep through sharp coral and sand. Ahead, over 1,000 warriors waited armed not with steel, but spears and fire-hardened sticks. Magellan ordered his men to hold position. They fired muskets, but the powder was damp. The guns failed. The warriors charged. Stones flew. Spears arced. The Spanish formation broke. Magellan stood his ground. He was struck in the leg and the arm. A spear found his throat. He fell, surrounded. No retreat. No last words. His body was left behind, never recovered. Word of his death spread quietly through the fleet. The men were stunned. They had followed him across the world. Now they were leaderless in a place they barely understood. The death of Ferdinand Magellan left the expedition adrift morally, emotionally, and literally. The captain general was gone, but the voyage, somehow, had to continue. On board the remaining ships, the command structure fractured again. Arguments flared. A new leader was chosen, then another, then another. They were far from home, deep in unfamiliar waters. In a world where charts grew blank and alliances shifted with the tide. But slowly, and almost accidentally, they began to sail westward again. They left the Philippines quietly, fearing more violence. They passed through the Spice Islands, the long-sought Moluccas, and finally acquired their precious cargo: cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon. Barrels were packed with the fragrant spice. The scent, thick and sweet, clung to their clothes, their hair, the fabric of their sails. In those moments, the men whispered, "This is why we came." But they were now fewer than 150. 3 ships remained, and 2 of them were falling apart. The Concepcion was scuttled, too damaged to continue. Its wood stripped for repairs. Its memory left behind in the tides. That left 2 ships, Trinidad and Victoria. They faced a choice. Should they try to return east, retracing their path across the Pacific and through the Strait of Magellan? Or should they risk the long, unknown journey west, sailing around Africa? They split. The Trinidad, commanded by Gonzalo Gómez de Espinosa, attempted to sail eastward back across the Pacific. It was a disaster. They faced storms. Currents dragged them off course. Disease returned. Eventually, they were captured by the Portuguese, imprisoned, and scattered. Only a handful survived. But the Victoria, she turned west. Her new captain was Juan Sebastian Elcano, a quiet Basque navigator with a cautious nature and a steady hand. They sailed slowly down past Timor, into the Indian Ocean. They crossed the equator. They passed Madagascar, only barely. Their water ran low. Men died again. Then came the Cape of Good Hope, that long-feared horn of southern Africa, where winds spun wild and waves rolled like hills, where Portuguese patrols guarded the waters jealously. But Elcano did not stop. He sailed wide farther south than most dared. The wind screamed. The ship groaned. But she held. The Victoria, alone now, limped northward along the coast of Africa. The sails were patched and fraying. The wood swelled with salt. Rats scurried thin through empty barrels. The men were shadows. And then, on September 6, 1522, they saw land. Spain, 3 years after they had departed. Only 18 men stepped off the Victoria in Seville, sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, but alive. And in her hold, spices enough to pay for the entire voyage. News of their return spread slowly. Some were honored, some forgotten. Magellan was dead, but the world had changed. It had taken them 3 years. They had lost over 90% of their men. They had faced starvation, war, mutiny, and death. But they had done it. They had circled the earth. Today, the voyage is remembered for its bravery, its ambition, its cost. But for the men aboard, it was not a tale of conquest. It was a long, slow endurance, a test of human patience, of silence, of surviving the unknown. They were not explorers in the romantic sense. They were sailors, hungry, cold, scared, alive. And they came home finally to quiet streets, unfamiliar stars, and the sound of distant waves. And now, as you lie back, and the world of maps and sails fades behind your eyes, let your thoughts drift with them. out to sea, where the wind is soft, the stars unmoving, and history whispers softly from the waves. Sunken treasures and cursed cargo. What archaeologists found in wrecks off the coast of the Americas. Take a breath. Feel the rhythm of the waves. Let the present fall away. Imagine yourself floating far above a quiet seabed, somewhere off the coast of Central America. Below you, half buried in silt and coral, lies a ghost. The shadowed ribs of a wooden hull, a tangle of blackened chains, and the glint just faint of a coin that hasn't seen sunlight in 400 years. This is not just a shipwreck, it's a story of pride, peril, and forgotten treasure. Between the 1500s and 1700s, the oceans were highways of empire. Spain ruled much of the New World, and to keep its power flowing, it relied on one thing above all: silver. Silver mined in the Andes. Silver carried on the backs of donkeys and mules. Silver packed in crates, stamped with royal crests, and loaded piece by piece onto wooden ships bound for Seville. But the sea, as ever, had other plans. The treasure fleets, the Spanish called them flotas de Indias, the treasure fleets. They were enormous convoys, dozens of ships strong, designed to carry gold, silver, spices, and sugar from the Americas to Spain. Every summer, these fleets would gather in ports like Havana or Cartagena, load up with precious cargo, and wait for the right winds. When they sailed, they were floating fortunes. Each ship stuffed with boxes of silver reals, bars of pure gold, emeralds sewn into wool sacks, and Chinese porcelain wrapped in cotton. Some carried passengers, others livestock, but all carried risk. Pirates prowled the waters. Storms brewed off the coast of Florida. Navigational charts were often outdated, and reefs razor-sharp lay just beneath the waves. The Spanish tried to plan, but the ocean does not obey plans. The wreck of the Nuestra Señora da Atocha. One of the most famous wrecks was the Atocha, a galleon that set sail in 1622. She was a beast of a ship over 550 tons, armed with 20 cannons and laden with treasure. Silver from Peru, gold from Colombia, emeralds so clear they looked like frozen dew. The Atocha left Havana as part of the Tierra Firme fleet, heading north along the Florida Keys. But on September 6th, a hurricane struck. The winds screamed, the ships scattered, and the Atocha, unable to outrun the storm, was thrown against a reef. She sank in shallow water. Only 3 crews survived clinging to driftwood. Everyone else perished, and the treasure was lost. For over 350 years, the Atocha slept beneath sand and seagrass. Its location became legend. Divers searched. Rumors swirled. And then, in 1985, a man named Mel Fisher, a Florida treasure hunter, found it. After 16 years of diving, he uncovered over 40 tons of treasure. 1,000 silver bars, 114,000. Silver coins, gold chains, gemstones, religious relics, navigational tools. The sea had preserved it all. Some of the coins were still stacked, just as the crew had packed them centuries earlier. But this was no ordinary find. It was a time capsule. Historians studied the artifacts not just for their value, but for what they meant. A tiny silver spoon told of a sailor's daily meals. A gold crucifix, hollow inside, once held a relic, perhaps a sliver of bone. An astrolabe, still legible, had guided the ship from Panama to Cuba. Even the chains used to bind slaves were recovered mute, rusted, and terrible in their silence. The Atocha wasn't just a treasure ship. It was a floating microcosm of an empire, rich, violent, and fragile. And it was not alone. Across the Atlantic world, hundreds, perhaps thousands of ships met the same fate. Some sank quietly. Others broke apart violently. Some were looted by pirates. Their wrecks burned. Others were buried whole by shifting sands. Every one of them now lies somewhere below the waves, waiting. Off the coast of present-day Colombia, just beyond the quiet beaches of Cartagena, lies another ship, one far more elusive, the San Jose, a Spanish galleon that vanished beneath the waves in 1708. She was the crown jewel of the South Sea Fleet, carrying one of the largest treasures ever loaded onto a single vessel. More than 11 million gold and silver coins, jewels, and personal luxuries meant to finance Spain's war efforts in Europe. The coins alone, if counted one by one, would take days just to name. Each stamped with a royal seal, minted in Peru or Bolivia, and loaded by candlelight into crates lined with wool. The San Jose was large, even by galleon standards. A floating fortress with over 60 cannons, built to protect her precious cargo from pirates and hostile navies. And still, she sank. It was June 8, 1708. British ships from the Royal Navy intercepted the treasure fleet off Bar Island, near Cartagena. A naval battle erupted. It did not last long. One of the British ships, the Expedition, fired a broadside volley, and the San Jose exploded. Witnesses said the night sky turned gold with flame, then black. The ship, the treasure, and most of her crew disappeared. There were no survivors, no wreckage, no debris, only silence. For centuries, the San Jose remained a whispered legend, a phantom ship, a riddle hidden beneath tropical waters. Governments argued, explorers searched. Lawsuits formed before the wreck was even found. And then, in 2015, after more than 300 years, the wreck was finally located, hidden beneath layers of coral and sediment. The exact location remains classified by the Colombian government. To this day, no one outside official circles is allowed to dive to it, because the San Jose is more than treasure. It's a time bomb of politics, ownership, and colonial legacy. And perhaps something more. Curses, myths, and the power of belief. Not every shipwreck whispers history. Some scream, some, it is said, are cursed. Spanish sailors believed the sea had moods, that she could be appeased, but never fully trusted. They told stories of ships that sailed into fog and never returned, of coins that brought misfortune, of emeralds that wept when held by the unworthy. It may sound like myth, but consider, many of the men who salvaged wrecks, divers, archaeologists, even modern treasure hunters, met strange fates. Fishermen found drowned, coins lost mysteriously in transit, ships sunk during recovery operations. Is it coincidence? Or something else? The Atasha, for example, took 16 years to find. Shortly after Mel Fisher's son and daughter-in-law were killed in a boating accident. Fisher continued, but even he spoke softly when discussing the sea. She gives, he said, and she takes. In the world of maritime archaeology, belief moves quietly. Divers often leave offerings, small coins, prayers, even flowers before exploring a wreck. They move slowly, not just for safety, but out of reverence. Because inside a shipwreck, time stops. The interior of a forgotten ship. Imagine descending into the hold of a sunken galleon. The light filters down in pale green beams. Plank walls are furred with coral. Fish flicker past silver plates, lying where they were once packed. There is no sound. Only the slow creak of your own breath, and the endless hush of silt stirring with every fin. You pass barrels, still sealed. You pass a bell, unmoved for centuries. And then you see it. A pile of coins, still held in place by the rotted remains of a crate. Their faces are still legible. Some bear the cross of Castile. Others, the coat of arms of Philip V. They are history. But also something else. Memory. Motion paused. Greed, fear, power, and faith frozen beneath salt and pressure. Divers say that after a few minutes, you forget the treasure. You notice instead the details. A spoon with initials carved into it, a boot, half consumed by sea worms, a tiny inkwell, still closed. These were lives, not just cargo manifests. And though the ocean has erased names, the objects remain, like quiet voices waiting to be heard. Beneath the quiet swells of the Atlantic, off the coast of Cape Cod, lies the wreck of a ship once captained by a man named Sam Bellamy. His vessel was the Widow Galley, and it was a pirate ship. But unlike most tales of piracy, filled with clashing swords and roaring cannons, the story of the Widow ends, as many do, in silence. The Widow, a pirate's treasure, lost to time. Originally built as a slave ship, the Widow was sleek, fast, and brutally efficient. She sailed the triangular trade route Africa to the Caribbean, to New England, carrying human lives as cargo. But in 1717, she was captured by pirates. Sam Bellamy, a former British sailor turned rogue, took command. He and his crew filled her with stolen riches: silver, gold, indigo, sugar, and rare textiles from across the Atlantic world. They sailed north, dreaming of disappearing into colonial America. But the ocean had other ideas. In April of that year, a fierce nor'easter rose up along the coast of Massachusetts. Bellamy tried to outrun it, hugging the shore. The winds howled. The Widow struck a sandbar near Wellfleet, and she broke apart in the freezing surf. More than 140 men perished. The ship vanished beneath the waves. For centuries, locals whispered of pirate gold buried in the shifting sands. But it wasn't until 1984 that marine explorer Barry Clifford found it. The recovery of the Widow was slow. Divers uncovered bronze cannons, gold coins, and even shackles remnants of her earlier days as a slave ship. But most haunting of all was a human femur, fused into a concretion with a pistol and belt buckle. A pirate sealed into the wreck, still clutching his weapon, still waiting. The Widow is now a museum exhibit, but the wreck itself is protected. Sand still drifts over her timbers. Shells settle into the curves of gunports. And somewhere below, perhaps, lie the final unrecovered chests, now more history than treasure. Slave ships beneath the sea. Not all shipwrecks glitter. Some are silent tombs. Across the Atlantic, from the West Indies to the Gulf of Mexico, lie the wrecks of slave ships. Hundreds of them. Most are unmarked. Few are studied. Many are lost forever. But some, through accident or storm, were preserved. One such ship was the Henrietta Marie. She sank in 1700 near the Florida Keys. At first, divers thought it was just another merchant wreck. But slowly, the truth emerged. Dozens of iron bilboes leg shackles were recovered, alongside copper trade kettles, beads, and ivory. No gold, no silver, only the weight of memory. The Henrietta Marie had just delivered over 190 enslaved people to Jamaica. On the return voyage, she struck a reef. Her crew survived, but she remained half buried beneath coral until discovered in the 1970s. Today, her recovered shackles rest in a museum. And every few years, descendants of the Middle Passage hold memorial dives at the site. They don't touch anything. They just float above the wreck, silent, listening. These ships carry no treasure, but their value is incalculable. Each rivet, each plank, each cargo tally scratched into a board is a witness to lives uprooted, systems built on cruelty, and oceans crossed in bondage. The sea, in its stillness, remembers. How modern archaeology dives into the past, exploring these wrecks, requires more than scuba tanks. Today, marine archaeologists use advanced tools. Side-scan sonar to map the seafloor magnetometers to detect metal buried under sand ROVs that descend to depths no human diver can reach. Sub-bottom profilers that send pulses through silt to find hidden hulls. Sometimes, all they find is a faint shadow in the mud. Other times, a cannon peeks out encrusted with barnacles. And every so often, A single glinting coin changes the timeline of an empire. The process is slow. Divers spend hours carefully brushing sediment with soft tools. Each artifact is mapped, photographed, and recorded. There is no rush, no shouting, only quiet breathing, and the rhythmic click of cameras echoing through the deep. Even the smallest object, a nail, a bead, a scrap of sailcloth, can unlock centuries. Inside a sunken ship, everything becomes deliberate, even time. Preserved in salt and silence, beneath the surface, time moves differently. There are no ticking clocks, no footsteps, no winds, only the slow, almost imperceptible drift of silt, and the weight of years settling into stillness. This is where the ocean holds her stories. Not loudly, but patiently. Ruins beneath the waves. Somewhere in the Mediterranean, off the coast of Antikythera, lies a wreck that changed everything we thought we knew. It went down over 2,000 years ago. A Roman-era merchant ship, heavy with cargo. Jars of wine and olive oil, marble statues, coins from across the empire. But it wasn't the statues or coins that caught the world's attention. It was a small lump of corroded bronze. It didn't look like much at first, but as scientists cleaned and studied it over months and years, they discovered something strange: gears, dozens of them, finely cut, interlocking. It became known as the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient computer, likely used to track the stars, eclipses, and calendars. Built over 1,000 years before anything remotely like it would appear again. All of it found in the quiet dark, under layers of sponge and coral. The ocean had held it gently and forgotten. What it's like inside a preserved wreck. Not all shipwrecks are broken. Some, astonishingly, remain almost whole. Cold water helps. Low oxygen, still currents. These preserve the wood, the cloth, even the remains of cargo, stacked just as they were packed centuries ago. Take the wrecks in the Baltic Sea. The water there is cold and brackish, ideal for preservation. And within it lies the Vasa, a Swedish warship that sank in 1628. Raised in the 20th century, she was so well preserved that researchers found pigments on carvings, allowing them to recreate the exact colors of the 17th century. Other wrecks remain on the seafloor, untouched. Divers enter through the cargo hatches. Inside, crates of weapons, plates, ropes still coiled, a captain's chair, a journal fused shut by pressure and algae. Everything still. You can hear your own breathing echo against the wooden beams. Even the fish seem quieter there. The science of slowness underwater archaeology requires an unusual pace. You cannot rush salt. Divers document before they touch. They brush, not scrape. They photograph every inch. Once artifacts are brought up, they must be kept wet often for years before being slowly dried and stabilized. Iron objects are soaked in chemical baths. Wooden beams are injected with waxes to preserve their shape. Textiles are frozen, vacuum dried, and studied under microscopes. It's meticulous and very, very slow. But in that slowness, something profound happens. You begin to see history not as a series of events, but as a weight carried forward, pressed into the bones of ships, settled into the seams of barrels, whispered from copper coins and broken tiles. The ocean guards these things, not jealously, not cruelly, but with a kind of solemn patience. When history sleeps, there's something humbling about the ocean's ability to preserve and erase. Some wrecks are known. Others are hinted at in letters, journals, or port records. Some, perhaps thousands, have been forgotten entirely. No map points to them. No one remembers their names. And yet they remain, silently giving shelter to eels and crustaceans. Their timbers now part of the seafloor. Their stories dissolved, piece by piece, into the salt. Maybe you're picturing one now, a ship you've never seen, its mast tilted gently, the last breath of a sailor still echoing in the hold. Not frightening, not loud, just there, still real. And now as your eyes begin to rest, and the weight of the day drifts away like kelp on the tide, let your thoughts sink down through the layers of silt and centuries, past cannonballs and candle holders, past shoes and silver forks and bottles of oil, to where silence holds everything gently, and nothing is truly lost, only waiting. Even the most forgotten ships have echoes, not just in coral-covered hulls or scattered cargo, but in stories. Stories passed through generations. Stories whispered by sailors, logged by monks, or buried in merchant ledgers. Stories that float, even when the ships do not. And sometimes, those stories lead us back. Maps of memory long before modern sonar or GPS, explorers relied on memory, on word of mouth, on rumors. A sailor swore he saw wreckage off the Yucatan coast. A pearl diver claimed he touched bronze beneath the reef. A fisherman pulled up a silver spoon in his net. Each of these tiny threads, seemingly disconnected, formed a map. Not a map of latitude and longitude, but of curiosity. Many of the great wrecks were found not by governments or universities, but by patient individuals who listened to stories, who believed in shadows, and followed them. Ghost ships and the fear of the deep. The ocean has long been a place of fear, not because of what it contains, but because of what it hides. Sailors told stories of ghost ships, silent vessels seen in fog, no crew on board, no sails raised, just drifting, always watching. Some thought they were omens. Others believed they were real wrecked ships still afloat, condemned to wander forever. The Flying Dutchman is one such legend. A Dutch vessel doomed to sail endlessly, cursed after a defiant captain tried to pass Cape Horn in a storm and swore he would do so, even if it took eternity. Today, historians see these tales as metaphors for obsession, loss, the pressure of empire. But beneath that metaphor is always a ship, and a sailor, and the sea that took them both. A world below. As you listen, try to picture the seafloor not as an emptiness, but as a kind of inverted museum. Shelves of forgotten crates, rooms built of kelp and barnacle, corridors filled with moonlight, refracted through the waves. There is no order, no plaques, no velvet ropes, only the quiet, slow shifting of time. A cup here, a buckle there, a lamp, crusted over, but still recognizable. Together, they tell a story without voice or ink, a story told through rust and rot and remarkable survival. What we carry, every wreck is a record of trade, of empire, of daily life, but also of hope, of ambition, of human fragility. The galleons that sank were not just treasure ships. They carried letters, tools, books, mirrors, paintings, even toys. Tiny wooden animals carved for a merchant's child, a doll made of straw, a set of dice, worn at the corners from long nights of waiting. None of these items were listed on the cargo manifests, but they are what make a ship real. They remind us that behind every coin was a miner, behind every cannon, a blacksmith, behind every ship, 1,000 hands. Returning to the surface now, as our journey through Segment 3 nears its close, let your mind drift upward. Slowly, let the silence of the deep rise behind you. Let the weight of centuries slip off your shoulders. You've seen the coins, the curses, the legends, and the bones. You've walked through flooded holds and watched moonlight scatter over coral. And now you return, back through time, back through tides, back to the surface, where the waves break gently, and the past still stirs just beneath the calm. Noble passengers, life in the captain's quarters, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you are aboard a vast Spanish galleon, the Manila Galleon, as it cuts slowly across the Pacific. The wind stirs the sails gently. The creaking of ropes and distant calls of sailors echo above. And below deck, in the damp shadows, men sleep on the floor, packed shoulder to shoulder, beside barrels of salted meat and stale biscuit. But you are not among them. You are a passenger of status. Perhaps a diplomat, or the wife of a merchant noble. Perhaps a Jesuit priest sent to survey the empire's farthest reaches. Or a royal courier tasked with delivering letters sealed by the Spanish crown. You are shown to your quarters, not large, but private. Not luxurious by today's standards. But on a ship like this, they are palatial. Here, the journey unfolds in a rhythm apart from the chaos below. The architecture of privilege. The captain's quarters were not just a room, they were a symbol. Tucked near the stern, often elevated above the main deck, they looked out over the ship's wake. The room was built of wood dark, polished, and often fragrant with oils. If the galleon had just left Manila, you might still catch the sweet scent of sandalwood or spices from the cargo below. The furniture was simple, but heavy. A writing desk, a small table with inlaid designs, and a bed short, by modern standards, but raised above the floor. At sea, even a cushion was a kind of nobility. Walls were lined with maps, framed religious icons, and sometimes painted miniatures of saints. A small altar might stand in the corner. An oil lamp flickered gently, casting long shadows across the beams. And here, as the hull groaned in waves slapped the wood outside, you slept. Dressing for the ocean clothing like everything else, changed at sea. A nobleman might still wear lace at the cuffs, but he would trade velvet for wool, something durable. A lady might wear a silk overdress, layered over linen and muslin, but it would be practical, stitched for long voyages and the rigors of damp cabins. Clothing trunks were carefully packed, often with herbs and lavender to keep moths at bay. Mirrors, too, were brought aboard small, polished silver-backed glass. Brushing one's hair, putting on gloves, tightening a collar, these were not mere habits. They were affirmations of class. To appear elevated, even while surrounded by salt air and filth, was the quiet duty of every noble passenger. Dining on the galleon. Here is where the difference between class and commoner became unmistakable. The crew ate biscuit, salted fish, and beans when supplies lasted. You, however, were summoned to a private meal in the captain's quarters, or a shared dining area for elite passengers. The meals were modest by land standards, but by sea, they were extraordinary. Hard cheeses wrapped in waxed cloth, salted meats preserved in vinegar-sweetened rice, with dried fruits, imported spices like cinnamon and clove. Used sparingly but richly water, turned stale quickly, so wine was often the beverage of choice. Sometimes sherry or fortified brandy, diluted and carefully rationed. The food was served on tin or ceramic dishes, with real forks and spoons rare among sailors. To dine was not just to eat. It was to remember civility amid chaos. Conversations at sea, in the calm of the evening, when the ship's motion became rhythmic, noble passengers gathered. They discussed politics, trade, weddings and harvests, and always home. A Jesuit might speak of a mission upriver in Luzon. A merchant's wife might describe the fabrics she would buy in Acapulco. A courtier might share news from Seville. Time passed not in minutes, but in stories. When paper permitted, letters were written. When the ink froze or ran out, thoughts were spoken softly, almost like prayers. And above, the stars wheeled silently overhead. The dangers of distinction. To be a noble passenger aboard a galleon was to float between two worlds, the elevated realm of rank and ritual, and the raw, unpredictable domain of the ocean. You were treated with deference, given a bed, served warm food, and protected by the captain's order. But that protection was only as strong as the hull, and sometimes the sea pushed back. When storms came, noble or not, no one was immune to the wrath of a typhoon or squall. The walls of the captain's quarters might shake. Water might pour through gaps in the timbers, and even the most elegant gown or robe could be soaked in salt. Passengers clung to bedposts. Servants scrambled to tie down trunks. Prayers some whispered, others shouted filled the cabin. The storm did not know ranks. Only the wind mattered. Afterward, torn sails flapped above. The crew stumbled back to duties, and the passengers, pale and quiet, emerged to take the air, silently grateful to see daylight again. Women on board, grace in isolation. Life aboard a galleon was not easy for anyone, but for women of class, it was particularly complex. Their movements were restricted partly for safety, partly to maintain propriety in the close quarters of a floating world dominated by men. Women of rank often stayed in curtained cabins or behind screens. They read from small books, embroidered, or wrote letters they might never be able to send. A lady might have a maid, but even so, bathing was rare. Water was limited, so powders, oils, and perfumed cloths became essential. Despite discomfort, their presence created a strange kind of balance. In the hierarchy of the galleon, a noblewoman carried the weight of two kingdoms, the court and the church. Children at sea children, though rare among noble passengers, were not unheard of. A governor's son returning to Spain for education. A merchant's daughter accompanying her parents to a new colonial post. They were often treated with gentleness by both passengers and crew, a source of curiosity and sometimes quiet joy. Toys were few: a carved animal, a cloth doll, a spinning top made from bone. Lessons were spoken, not written. Discipline came from the parents or the chaplain if one sailed aboard. But more than anything, these children learned how to wait. Days passed in rhythm. They watched the sky, traced waves with their fingers, and listened to stories, to creaks, to the soft, constant language of the sea. The captain's dual loyalty. The captain of a galleon was more than a sailor. He was a diplomat, a magistrate, a man of the sea, yes, but also a representative of the Spanish crown. He held court in his quarters, seated at a broad table. Here, disputes were settled. Crew discipline, cargo claims, confessions. Even among nobles, his word held sway, but only so far as it did not contradict the interests of the church or the order sealed in wax from Spain. Some captains were men of politics. Others were quiet, stern mariners who had earned their authority through decades at sea. But all bore the weight of fragile balance. A wrong word could cause offense. A missed tide could cost weeks. A single misstep could mean mutiny or disaster. The church at sea. In many voyages, especially those linked to the Manila galleons, a Jesuit or Franciscan priest would sail aboard. His role was both spiritual and diplomatic. He offered mass in a small corner of the deck, sometimes beside crates of porcelain, sometimes under fluttering flags. He heard confession. He administered rites when sickness spread, and in the darkest nights, when storms had passed or fears rose again, he offered a steady voice. Whispers behind the curtains, even in the softest chambers, the quiet was rarely empty. Behind polished panels and curtained sleeping berths, the passengers carried with them more than silk robes and embroidered letters. They carried longing, worries, secrets. You could feel it sometimes, walking softly across the deck. That strange energy in the air, like a page half written, folded and hidden beneath a pillow. Among the noble passengers were diplomats, clergy, and merchants, but also their wives, their sons, and occasionally their companions' men or women, official or otherwise. In the hush of the 16-week voyage, time loosened. Boundaries blurred. Two people, strangers in Seville, might speak across a shared prayer bench, might exchange books, might walk slowly on the deck at twilight. And sometimes, when the ship rocked gently under a silver moon, they might fall in love. These romances were not declared. They lived in glances, shared ink, small gifts slipped in secret. A ribbon, a pressed flower, a folded note written in tight, hidden script. Some remained innocent, others did not. Letters that traveled the world. The most powerful item aboard a noble cabin was not gold, but paper. Letters sealed in wax, pressed with rings of state, traveled from Manila to Madrid. They carried news of rebellions, accounts of trade, requests for military aid, and sometimes matters more personal, arranged marriages, inheritance disputes, apologies or accusations. A single envelope might change the life of a family in Castile, might shift policy in the Philippines, because there was no second chance, no second ship. If the letter was lost, so too was the message. These letters were protected with great care, placed in oiled leather pouches, hidden inside trunks, sometimes duplicated and carried by two separate messengers, one posing as a merchant, the other as a priest, because the stakes were enormous, and the ocean was always hungry. The sick and the silenced, no matter how fine the bed, no matter how pure the incense or silken the curtain. Illness did not spare the elite. Fevers rose in noble cabins as they did in sailor bunks. Teeth loosened. Appetites vanished. And in that tight space, every cough was noticed. Every chill became suspect. A lady might retreat to her bed. A priest might offer quiet prayers behind the curtain. Servants were hushed. Meals were left untouched. Sometimes the sickness passed. Sometimes it did not. On a galleon, there were few remedies. Wine infused with cloves. Cloths soaked in vinegar. Hot water when it could be spared. More often, there was nothing to do but wait. And in those final days, the captain was summoned. He would enter quietly, speak in calm tones, ask if the patient wished to dictate a final letter. Some did. Others simply stared at the ceiling, the sound of creaking wood surrounding them. Burial at sea. When a noble passenger died, it was not shouted. There was no alarm. Only a slow ripple of change. The lantern outside their cabin was extinguished. The priest was summoned. If possible, the body was washed and dressed, in clean linen, sometimes with a rosary folded into the hands, and then, at dawn or dusk, a cloth was wrapped around the body, a weight was sewn at the feet, and the passengers gathered in silence. There were no coffins, no markers, just the words of the priest, a short prayer, and the final sound quiet but unforgettable of the bundles slipping into the waves. Some passengers wept, others stared ahead, unmoving, and the ship continued on. Legacy and absence. What became of noble passengers after the voyage? Many returned home changed, not just older or more tired, but rearranged internally by the vastness of the sea. They had lived in silence, in ceremony, in close proximity with danger. Some became chroniclers. They wrote books published quietly in Madrid or Seville on trade, on ocean life, on the nature of time at sea. Others spoke little of it. They returned to their estates, raised families, and only occasionally glanced at maps. But if you had asked them late at night, by a fire, when the guests had gone, they would have told you the truth, that the ship was never far, that the creaking of its timbers still echoed in their sleep, that the taste of salt never fully left the tongue, and that in the soft stillness of their memory, the cabin remained. A ship of many kingdoms, the Spanish Galleon was not just a vessel. It was a structure of deliberate inequality, built into wood and sail. At the bottom, in the hull, barrels, rats, slaves, deckhands, and silence. Above them, the common sailors and conscripts. In the next layer, petty officers, gunners, scribes. And at the highest deck, both physically and metaphorically, resided the noble passengers. Those who represented church, crown, coin, or court. It was a ship, but also a kingdom. Every stair, every curtain, every spoken title reminded everyone of their place. And yet, the ocean ignored it all. When hierarchy failed, there were moments when the illusion fractured. A nobleman might slip and fall. A well-dressed courtier might vomit from seasickness before the sailors he ignored. In storms, rank meant little. Even the wealthiest passengers clutched the same ropes, bailed water from the same flooded corridors, listened to the same wooden beams groan under pressure. And in these moments, class did not disappear, but it softened. A sailor offered a cup of water to a gentleman. A noblewoman helped mend a torn sailcloth. Small gestures, quickly forgotten in daylight, but meaningful in the dark. Performing power still, appearances had to be maintained. A noble passenger might be ill, afraid, or uncertain, but their posture, their dress, their tone remained carefully measured. They hosted small dinners, even when the ship lurched. They quoted scripture or Cervantes, even when their hands shook. They played the role of poise. Because on a galleon, appearance was power, and power kept the delicate social fabric intact. The galleon as empire. In many ways, the galleon was a perfect metaphor for the Spanish Empire at sea. It was rigid, rich, creaking under the weight of too much cargo and too many secrets. Built for glory, but prone to collapse. And at the heart of it all were the noble passengers. Not generals, not sailors, but people caught in the middle, between orders and uncertainty, between comfort and collapse. They did not steer the ship. They did not chart its course, but they were expected to embody its greatness, to sit at polished desks, to bless meals with silver cutlery, to live with a sense of calm, even as storms gathered. And so they did. A final reflection. Now, picture the ship once more. It rocks gently in the water. A warm wind rustles the sails. Distant waves strike the hull like a soft metronome. Inside the captain's quarters, a single lamp flickers. You are reclining on a narrow bed, covered in woven linen. A journal rests beside you. Somewhere, a voice sings quietly in a language you do not understand. You are safe. You are warm. The past moves around you like a tide, but you are still. In this final hour, let your thoughts drift to the cabin's small details. The smell of wax on old wood, the echo of footsteps in soft boots, the rustle of silk in still air, the faint ticking of a pocket watch on the desk, and then let the ship fade. Let the ropes loosen. Let the maps roll closed. Let the candle gently burn low. Because this journey, like every voyage of empire, was not eternal. It was built on tides, on time, on memory. And now, as your breathing slows and the quiet presses in once more, let the galleon pass into the dark, carrying its noble passengers, its polished silver, its final letters, all into history. Sleep through the centuries. Thank you for sailing with us. You've traveled far tonight. From the salt-stained hammocks of weary sailors ... to the gilded solitude of the captain's quarters. Through tempests, across unmarked graves beneath the waves, and into the private memories of passengers long forgotten. You've walked the length of a galleon, not just in miles, but in time, in silence, in story, in shadow. Now the ship quiets, the sails fall still, and the stars above, once used to chart the world, glide gently behind the clouds. There is no need to remember every detail. No need to hold on to names or dates or kings. Just let the echoes of the past settle in your breath. Let the waves grow softer. Let the wood beneath your thoughts creak no more. Let the deck dissolve into dark. You are not on watch tonight. There are no storms left. No sails to mend, no maps to fold. Only stillness, only sleep. Thank you for joining Passed Off to Sleep. Sleep deeply. Sleep safely. Sleep through the centuries. We'll see you again on the next voyage.